Another part of the impact of trauma on brain development that I think is really important is called implicit memory. Most people haven't heard of implicit memory, so let me explain that a little bit. So, when we think of memory, what we're commonly thinking of is called explicit or narrative memory. That's our ability to tell a story and talk about something that's happened to us in our lives. And that type of memory, explicit memory, is governed by the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is mature around age 3, which is why most people's earliest memories is somewhere around the age of 3 or 4. So, the hippocampus is responsible for those types of explicit memories and it stores them. Now, recalling explicit memory is a conscious process. So, you're thinking about it on purpose and trying to remember, oh, what was that story that happened, right? So, you are consciously recalling those memories in a narrative form. And we can forget those memories. So that's important to know too. But there's another type of memory that people don't really know about very often, and it's called implicit memory. So implicit memory is stored by the amygdala. And if you'll recall from an earlier lesson, the amygdala is mature at birth. So implicit memories are stored beginning at birth and possibly even earlier in the amygdala. Now, the way that implicit memories come out is through sensory and visceral recall. So that means that something, as incoming sensory information, would trigger an implicit memory, which would trigger an emotional reaction from the person. So it's not something that's conscious, it's subconscious. And so it's also not something that we can control. And it's not really quite something we can identify because it's something that happened before we had language and before our explicit memory or our narrative memory was available to us. So it's really common that experiences in early childhood, traumatic experiences, come out by being triggered, sensory or visceral recall. So, for example, if a child was baking cookies with a parent and then something traumatic happened, that felt very scary for the child, that left the child feeling very vulnerable and helpless, years later, still, that child might have increased anxiety when they smell cookies baking because that incoming sensory information triggers an implicit memory. The other thing that's really important to know about implicit memory is that forgetting does not apply. You cannot forget implicit memories because they're not a conscious process. So when sensory triggers come in that trigger implicit memories, the amygdala sounds the alarm and everyone around you is thinking, what is going on with her? I do not understand. So the amygdala typically stores highly charged emotional memories, whether they are good or bad. And so that can be something when you're thinking about how trauma might impact somebody, even trauma in early childhood, to keep in mind that implicit memory is really strong and lasts forever and is available to us, and that part of our brain is mature far before we even know.